One of the most important parts of any folding phone is going to be the hinge. It's the thing that holds the two halves of the device together. You use it every day, multiple times, opening and closing this device. And unlike hinges in old phones, you're actually bending a screen. And the way that that screen is bent makes a big difference in a lot of things. In this video, we're going to take a look at my Z Fold 4, my Pixel Fold, my OnePlus Open, and we're going to kind of compare and contrast how these hinges work, how the screen, the creases look, and how they're holding up with time. With any of these hinges, more time equals more degradation, and we're going to look at exactly what that means and kind of what you can expect with these sorts of devices. All right, so we have the OnePlus Open, the Pixel Fold, and my Z Fold 4. I wish I had a Fold 5 to do this comparison with, but the Fold 4 is what I have. The crease, the hinge, not a lot changed with the Fold 5, so this should be largely just as true. Let's go through these, and I'm going to kind of tell you what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing with each of these hinges. Now, keep in mind, we're going from oldest to newest. So this guy is a year old. I've had it for a year, so the hinge has broken in, I would say, about as much as it's going to. The Pixel Fold is more recent, only a few months old, and the OnePlus Open is only a couple of weeks old. So definitely keep that in mind as we go through these. So let's start off with the Z Fold 4, and we'll punch in a little bit here and maybe slide these slightly out of the way so we can really kind of focus on this one device. So the Z Fold does have a fairly prominent crease. Now, I'm not somebody that is really all that bothered by the crease because, let's be honest, when the screen is on, you're really not going to be able to see it anyways unless you are way off axis with a bright light pointing straight at it. I will say you can feel that crease fairly easily as well. It does feel like a little valley, a deep little valley there in the middle of the screen. In terms of the actual hinge itself, though, I think things have held up relatively well. When you first start to open it, it doesn't require a ton of pressure anymore. In fact, that little motion there is fairly easy. It actually used to be kind of difficult, more difficult than this. It's loosened up a bit. Once it gets to that point, though, it does stiffen up a little bit more. And now it requires quite a bit of effort. That area right there requires a pretty substantial amount of effort, and it stays fairly consistent, but then it starts to ease up a little bit as it opens, and that's where we are nice and comfortably. If you notice this here, we do often open up to not quite flat. I'd say we're about flat there, but if I just naturally open it as I would, we're going to be like that, and we are ever so slightly off from being flat. It's going to be really hard to pick this up on a video. It's very, very subtle. We're talking about maybe 179 degrees, 178 degrees instead of the full 180. So I'd say this hinge has held up fairly well. It does still feel pretty decent. It's mostly consistent in terms of its resistance. If we set it aside, let's grab the Pixel Fold. And if we talk about this device, a lot of the same things are going to be true. That crease is really, really similar. I'd say it's not as deep, but it is wider than it is on the Z Fold devices. Still quite visible. If we unlock the device, which mine is actually dead, so I'm going to need to power it up to show you what it looks like with it on. We'll do this for the time being, and I'll go ahead and shut it, and we'll talk about the actual feeling of opening the device. When you first start to open it, this first section here is definitely now more difficult than it is on the Z Fold. You really have to pry this thing open. Once it gets to about there, though, it does ease up a little bit, and it is fairly smooth and consistent. It feels like it gets maybe a little bit stiffer in that region, and then kind of just, it's a little mushy as it fully opens up, which is something I've talked about in another video. Let's open this thing back up and we'll unlock it. So you can see, just like I did on the Z Fold, the crease is there. You can definitely feel it. It is wider, not quite as deep, but it's pretty close. It's definitely a more spread out crease, but you're not going to see it when the screen is on. Just to loop back around, when I talk about the Pixel Fold feeling a bit mushy, what I mean is that whether it's the OnePlus Open or the Z Fold, once you get into this last section, there's sort of a relief of tension, or in the case of the OnePlus, like a spring assist, that allows it to just sort of fall open with a sort of suddenness that the Pixel Fold just doesn't have. The Pixel Fold stays tense and with that resistance all the way until the very end, whereas these other devices, Just don't. You could not do that with the Pixel Fold. Let me show you. So we're in that same area, and it is still very, very tense. Like you've got to really kind of give it some motion for it to pop open the rest of the way. So when I talk about it feeling mushy, that's what I mean. It's the fact that there's a lot of tension at the end. See, it still did not open all the way. You have to give it some pressure. It requires more force at the end of the opening procedure. And that's probably somewhat why this device sometimes does not open all the way flat, because it requires pressure. Even at the end, even at the final part of the opening procedure, it still requires pressure. Whereas the Z Fold and the OnePlus Open, look, see how it's just flattening itself back out? That's what I mean. Is one better than the other? That's up to you. I would say compared to the Z Fold, the Pixel Fold hinge does feel more consistent in its resistance. It does sort of have a mushy feeling as it finally does open. And as you can see, it is much more prone to not opening all the way. That is probably more visibly not flat than the Fold 4. Of course, just a slight amount of pressure, and you are now fully open 180 degrees. So I would say both of these devices suffer from not quite getting to 180. This one's a bit worse. They both can be, again, just a little bit of pressure, and they're fully open to 180. Something else that I notice when I'm using these devices, take something like the Z Fold, which again, mine is over a year old now. If it has sat and it's been in phone mode, or even if it's been opened up in tablet mode, if it has sat for, a couple of days and it's not been opened or closed, when I, sit down to do a video like this, I notice how much less consistent the resistance is opening and closing. But as the video, sort of wore on, it started smoothing back out again. So that is definitely something that's going to happen. These things need to be used in order to stay as smooth and consistent in terms of their resistance as they were when you first got them. Things are going to loosen up over time. That's just inevitable. It's a hinge. Hinges loosen up over time. But it's the consistency thing that is also kind of a question mark. My Pixel Fold still feels very consistent, more consistent than my Z Fold, but the Z Fold is over a year old, and the Pixel Fold has very rarely ever sat for more than a day without being opened or closed multiple times. So these are sort of almost like maintenance things that need to be happening with these devices to keep them feeling consistent. They kind of need to be used. And now let's talk about the OnePlus Open. When we look at the crease on the OnePlus Open, it is easily, by far, the hardest one to notice. And of course, when the screen is on, you're absolutely not going to notice it. Even off axis, it's going to be really, really difficult to notice. When the thing is fully closed, when you start to open it, it is the easiest of the three, no question. It opens up very, very easily. And what's weird about this device is you get to about here, and the resistance definitely does ramp up. It's more stiff, and then it starts to give way until you get to there, and it just sort of pops open. So easy, a little bit harder, and then it gets easier and easier until you get to about this area, and then you'll see it wants to just, like a switchblade, flick itself open the rest of the way. Now, I have been getting reports from people saying that their OnePlus Open is no longer naturally opening completely flat to 180 degrees. Mine, generally speaking, does, and it seems as though it's mostly due to how I open it. If I open it very carefully like that and I don't let it snap open, I may see it not open there. That looks pretty flat to me and pretty flat to my eye. But there have been occasions where it's not been quite 180 and I've had to put just a little bit of extra pressure, just like with the other two devices. And I suspect that may be something that happens over time with this device, just like it's happened over time with the other two devices. These hinges will sort of slowly degrade over time. It's only been a couple of weeks, but I will say this hinge does feel very similar to how it did when I first got it. I think it's slightly less energetic than it was before. It kind of had this like almost intense springing open thing going on. And it still does, in particular, when you use it, back to back with these other two foldable devices. The hinge feels completely different than on those other two. But yeah, it might be the case that it has gotten slightly less energetic with time. But like I've already said, all of these devices are going to have changes with their hinges. They may get a little bit looser, a little bit easier to open in certain spots, and then they may feel stiffer in the next section and then looser again in the next section. They seem to degrade in unique and interesting ways. So it's going to be interesting to see how the OnePlus Open Hinge changes over time. For me, so far, only a couple of weeks in, I have not seen anything substantial. The worst thing I can say is that if I'm opening it very slowly, every once in a while, it won't quite be. It'll be 179 degrees. That's pretty much the worst thing I can say about it. And again, there's nothing really unique about that experience. So guys, there you go. That's kind of the state of hinges right now in terms of foldable devices that you are probably looking at or potentially have already bought. Hopefully this brings some good information, some good data to the conversation to kind of demystify some of these things a little bit. The good news is there aren't really any problems here. These are just sort of changes. Maybe you prefer the way one hinge feels over the other. That's absolutely fair, and you're fully within your rights to do that. But again, hopefully this gives you some idea of what to expect with these devices. So thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content like this, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.